Layman Li is the leader of the Central Rite class at the Wufeng Church. He is Sister Crane Tseng's husband and works for the Highway Bureau as a bus driver. After studying Buddhism since 1959, Sister Crane has been convinced that deeply believing in the Buddha's teachings and devoutly chanting Buddha can turn bad luck into good luck in a life of many disasters and adversities. Therefore, she always advised her husband to recite Amitabha. Especially in times of emergency, it is even more critical to chant Amitabha Buddha desperately. However, Li was inattentive to her suggestion. Once he was driving at night on the mountain road from Puli back to Taichung. At a turn, suddenly the bus broke down. But no matter how he examined it, he could not see what was wrong with it. The passengers, one by one, had no choice but to get off the bus, find the phone by walking, and call a cab themselves. The conductor lady also went to inform the highway department to send a truck to tow back the bus. Li was left alone, sitting on the driving seat. No light was in sight on the mountain road in the dark. The environment was extremely dark. The hair on his body straightened up. Though it was not cold, he began to shiver actually. After pondering for a while, he thought of his wife Crane, who had reminded him to recite the Buddha's name. He immediately recited Namo Amitabha Buddha out loud. When he had chanted it dozens of times, the vehicle suddenly started to move. He immediately drove away and went all the way to Taichung, and it was safe and nothing happened. When I visited Li's home, Li told me about this inconceivable inspiration in person for reciting a phrase of the holy name. At that time, Sister Crane also interjected that a similar situation had happened once on her way back from Sun Moon Lake, and she had been relieved of her misfortune by chanting the Buddha's name. However, life is unpredictable. Li, who usually looked quite blessing, suffered from hypertension. 7 years ago, in the early 4th month of the lunar calendar, after he lay in bed for more than a year due to hypertension, the medication did not work for him. In the meantime, his mind wasn't away from the Buddha, and Bodhisattva always dwelt in his heart. Once he was near the end of his life, Sister Crane went to the church and invited several Lotus Fellows to chant Buddha for him. These Lotus Fellows took turns chanting early in the morning until midnight. But when they saw that the patient was still at his last gasp, it might delay to the next morning. So they decided to go home to rest and agreed to return tomorrow and continue chanting. Only 6 people, including his wife, their children, and Sister Osyu, still stayed to chant Buddha for him. At 2 a.m., a young soldier with local accent suddenly came and offered to help with the chanting. This young man, with his loud voice and devoutness, aroused Sister Osyu and others from napping. When they were chanting to sort of on the verge of single-mindedness, suddenly, everyone saw a white round light like the sun, flying through the door and into the house. Because the Crane's house was facing the west and directly to the main road in this town, the young man thought if a car was parked in front of the door, so he jumped out to see. While in the middle of the night, there was only silence and darkness all around. Suddenly, one ray of light, from the western void, emanated straight into the door. The young man saw such an unbelievable circumstance, which was baffling, and then looked inward. Meanwhile, the dying man showed a smiley face, breathed a big gasp, and passed away at the same time as the sunny ray. The house immediately restored to the darkness as usual. His wife, children, and Osyu all witnessed this miracle that Amitabha emitted light as he received the deceased. Later, they continued to chant the Buddha's name until dawn. The next day, other Lotus friends returned to help with the chanting, which lasted until 11 a.m. The Buddha chanting had lasted for a total of 8 hours after the last gasp of the deceased. Everyone gathered around the deceased and saw he was even more solemn than alive, and tried to test his body temperature. The top of his head was still warm, his body was as soft as cotton. Those Lotus Fellows who came again to help with the chanting in the morning, heard of the light emitting that the Buddha received the deceased, were all disappointed, and said it was a pity that they didn't see the Buddha's light with their own eyes. Everything has karmic consequences, so the Buddha talked about cause and effect, which is indeed no difference at all. We need to know that Sister Osyu, who helped him with the chanting all night long, was a faithful Lotus Fellow of the church. But she was not without a reason to bring forth the devotion to chant for him like that. During his lifetime, when layman Li was a driver, every morning he worked the morning shift and passed by a town, there were always a group of students rushing to teaching. Whenever they were too late to get to the bus station, Li often pulled over to the side of the road and makes it easy for students to get in. It was because Li was so kind-hearted. When he was terminally ill, the children of Sister Osyu heard that Uncle Li was going to pass away and needed help chanting. The scene, when they were students rushing to school, Uncle Li pulled the bus over, instantly came vividly to their mind. So they urged their mother, "Mom, hurry to help the chanting for Uncle Li. He's been so good to us. Mom, you must pray until you send him to be reborn in the West." If Sister Osyu hadn't stayed up all night to help with the chanting, where would a young soldier have come to help with the prayers at 2 a.m.? Speaking of this good man, it was also an inconceivable blessing. He was standing guard at midnight in a nearby barracks when, in the silence of the night, he suddenly heard the chanting of Amitabha Buddha in his ears. During the 2 o'clock guard, the pure holy name of Amitabha penetrated deeply into the 8 consciousness fields of the soldier, and his mouth naturally followed the recitation of Amitabha until the end of the shift. This good man wanted to see who was so hardworking and truthfully practicing. So he followed the direction of the Buddha's voice and ran all the way to the Li family on Zhongjing Road in Wufeng. When he saw many people chanting Buddha in a house with the door open, he automatically joined the chanting. This young man must have great good roots. Otherwise, how could he have seen the Buddha's light in just over an hour of chanting? Later, this young man came to listen to my lectures while I was giving a sermon at the church, and a Lotus friend introduced him to me. Because he helped a mortal who suffered in the sea of life and death, was guided by the Buddha's light, and was reborn in the Western world of bliss. When I saw him, I was so grateful for his kindness and gave him a string of rosary beads and several Buddhist books. After a month or so, he was transferred to another place. Unfortunately, I forgot to ask him where he lived and his name at the time.